They sell us a dream so polished, so carefully packaged that it blinds the world to the truth beneath it. The American dream, this idea that anyone from anywhere can rise, can succeed, can carve out a destiny through hard work and determination, it is a beautiful illusion, a fairy tale dressed as reality. But let us ask the real question. Who truly lives this dream? Who benefits from this promise? And who is left behind, struggling in the shadows of a system designed not to uplift, but to divide? We are told that in America, opportunity is limitless, that no matter where you begin, if you work hard enough, you can make it. But is this the truth? Is success in America truly the product of merit, or is it a game rigged in favor of the powerful? The wealthiest 1% control more than the bottom 90% combined. Corporations wield more influence than entire communities. Those born into privilege stay privileged, while those born into struggle fight battles that were never meant to be won. And when the dream fails, when reality exposes the cracks, they blame the individual, never the system. They tell the poor they didn't work hard enough. They tell the struggling that they should have made better choices. They refuse to admit that the playing field was never even to begin with. They claim that America is the land of freedom. But what kind of freedom is this, where millions live paycheck to paycheck, drowning in debt, just to afford basic health care, just to send their children to school, just to have a roof over their heads? What kind of freedom is it where corporations can buy politicians, where billionaires can shape policies, while ordinary people struggle just to have their voices heard? This is not freedom. This is a system built to protect the powerful and silence those who dare to question it. Even education, the supposed great equalizer, has become a tool of exclusion. Students are buried under mountains of debt, forced to trade decades of their lives to pay for a degree that may never even grant them the stability they were promised. The cycle of economic enslavement begins young, and for many, it never truly ends. The truth is, the American dream is not a dream for all. It is a carefully marketed product sold to the world to uphold an empire, to sustain a system where wealth is concentrated at the top and the rest are left to fight over the scraps. And what of justice? They claim their system is the fairest in the world, that their courts uphold the principles of law and order. Yet time and again, we see that justice bends to power. The rich walk free, the poor fill the prisons, and entire communities are marginalized simply for who they are, for where they were born, for the color of their skin. This is not justice. This is not fairness. This is not what they claim it to be. And yet, despite all of this, America continues to sell its image to the world as the ultimate model, as the highest standard. They tell nations to follow their lead, to replicate their systems, to adopt their ways, never acknowledging that these same systems have left millions of their own citizens in suffering. The world is waking up to this reality. The illusion is beginning to shatter. So I ask again, who truly lives this dream? Is it the workers struggling to afford health care? Is it the students drowning in debt? Is it the families working multiple jobs just to put food on the table? Or is it the elite sitting comfortably at the top, ensuring that the system never changes? The answer is clear. And until we stop believing in the illusion, until we start demanding a new, just, and truly equal world, the dream will remain just that, a dream. They present themselves as the champions of democracy, the defenders of freedom, the beacon of hope for the world. They tell us that their system is the model to follow, that their values are universal, that their way is the only way. And yet, if we look past the carefully crafted image, if we strip away the slogans and the propaganda, we find a very different reality, one that exposes the contradictions at the heart of their claim to moral leadership. They speak of democracy as if they own it. They tell nations how to govern. They dictate who is fit to rule and who must be removed. They interfere where they see fit, all in the name of so-called democratic values. But let us ask, what does democracy look like inside their own borders? Do their people truly have a voice? Do their elections truly reflect the will of the people? Or is their entire system manipulated by those with money, by corporations, by special interest groups that fund candidates and shape policies behind the scenes? A government that serves the people should listen to the people, and yet time and again we see that in their system policies do not reflect public demand. They reflect the interests of the elite. Their leaders speak of fairness, yet their own citizens struggle under economic hardship. They speak of equality, yet racial and social injustices continue to plague their society. They speak of peace, yet their prisons are filled with those who dare to protest, who dare to speak against the system, who demanded their rights. How can a nation that silences dissent, that surveils its own people, that allows wealth to dictate governance, lecture others about democracy? Their hypocrisy extends beyond their borders. They claim to stand for human rights, but only when it is convenient. They will speak out when it suits their political agenda, yet turn a blind eye when their allies commit atrocities. They will condemn injustice in one country while funding war and destruction in another. They claim to support freedom, but only for those who align with their interests. If a nation chooses an independent path, if a leader refuses to bow to their demands, they will isolate them, punish them, destabilize them, all while speaking the language of democracy. They tell us that they stand for peace, yet history tells a different story. How many wars have they started in the name of spreading democracy? How many nations have they invaded? How many governments have they toppled? How many innocent lives have been lost under the banner of freedom? They destabilize regions, create conflict, and then present themselves as the solution. They sell weapons to both sides, profit from destruction, and then position themselves as peacemakers. This is not the work of a nation that seeks peace. This is the strategy of an empire that thrives on control. Their media plays a crucial role in maintaining this illusion. The world sees only what they allow it to see. Their failures are downplayed, their crimes are justified, their enemies are demonized. They control narratives, they shape public opinion, they manufacture consent for their actions. They will show images of suffering in one country and call for intervention while ignoring the suffering they have caused elsewhere. They use their influence not to inform but to manipulate, not to spread truth but to maintain power. And despite all of this, they still claim moral superiority. They still believe they have the right to dictate to the world. But the world is changing. The illusion is breaking. More and more nations are rejecting their interference. More people are seeing through the lies. More voices are rising against their double standards. This is not about rejecting democracy. This is about rejecting the false version they have imposed, the version that serves only their interests. True democracy is built from within, shaped by the people, not dictated by foreign powers. So, the question is not whether their system is perfect. It is whether they even have the right to impose it on others. The question is not whether democracy is valuable. It is whether it can ever exist when controlled by those who profit from division. They can no longer hide behind their slogans. They can no longer pretend to be what they are not. The world is watching, the world is questioning, and the world will no longer accept their contradictions in silence. They have built an illusion, a myth, so powerful that it has shaped the thinking of generations. They call themselves exceptional, different, superior. They tell the world that their system is the pinnacle of human achievement, that their way of life is the ideal to which all nations should aspire. They demand obedience not through force alone, but through the power of this belief. The belief that they are chosen, that they are destined to lead, that they are somehow above the rest of the world. But let us ask, who gave them this right? What makes them so exceptional? They claim their system is the best in the world, yet within their own borders, millions live in poverty. Their people work 2 or 3 jobs just to survive. Their cities are plagued by homelessness. Their youth are drowning in debt just to receive an education, and yet they continue to tell the world that their way is the only way, that no other model should be considered, that any alternative is a threat. If their system is so perfect, why does it fail so many of their own people? If their democracy is so pure, why is it controlled by money, by corporate interests, by a ruling class that never changes? They believe they are the guardians of morality, the ones who define right and wrong, justice and injustice. They judge the world, impose sanctions, punish those who refuse to submit to their authority. But when they commit the same crimes they condemn in others, there is silence. When their actions cause destruction, they rewrite history, shift the blame, pretend it never happened. Their exceptionalism is not built on truth. It is built on the power to control the narrative, to dictate which lives matter and which can be ignored. For decades, they have promoted the idea that they are more advanced, more enlightened, more civilized. They mock other cultures, belittle traditions, and interfere in the affairs of sovereign nations, all while pretending it is for the greater good. They believe the world must conform to their values, that any deviation from their model is backward, unacceptable. And yet, if we compare, if we truly examine what they offer versus what they claim, we see a different picture. Nations they label as failures often have stronger social support systems, better healthcare, lower crime rates, and more content citizens. Countries they dismiss as undemocratic sometimes have more engaged populations, more accountable leadership, and a deeper sense of national unity than their so-called model of governance. Their arrogance is not just political, it is cultural. They impose their entertainment, their fashion, their way of speaking, their way of thinking, until people begin to believe that to be successful, they must mimic them. They strip away identities, erase histories, rewrite what it means to be modern. But true progress is not imitation. True success is not in abandoning one's roots to conform to a foreign ideal. A nation does not become great by becoming a reflection of another. It becomes great by defining its own path, by building upon its own strengths, by forging its own future. They fear this. They fear a world where nations stand tall on their own, where people no longer look to them for validation, where their influence begins to wane. That is why they use every tool at their disposal to maintain their grip. They control global institutions, shape economic systems, set rules that benefit themselves while binding others in restrictions. They promote instability in regions where they see rising competition. They weaken potential rivals before they can become strong enough to challenge their dominance. And all of it is done under the mask of leadership, of responsibility, of global stewardship. But the world is waking up. The myth of their superiority is breaking. More nations are rejecting their dictates. More people are questioning their claims. More leaders are choosing independence over subservience. It is not about rejecting progress. It is about rejecting the false notion that progress can only come through them. It is not about resisting change. It is about defining change on our own terms, about creating a world where no single nation holds the power to decide the fate of all others. For too long, they have dictated the rules. For too long, they have controlled the narrative. But now, the illusion is fading. Their exceptionalism was never real. It was only ever a story they told the world and themselves to justify their dominance. That story is coming to an end. They speak of prosperity, of opportunity, of a system that rewards hard work and ambition. They tell the world that their way, their version of capitalism is the key to success, the only path to wealth and stability. But what they do not tell you is that their system is built on exploitation, that their wealth is sustained not by fairness or innovation alone, but by ensuring that millions remain trapped in a cycle of struggle. Their economy does not serve the people serve the economy. And when the system fails, when inequality deepens, when entire communities are left behind, they do not question the structure, they blame the victims. They have created a world where profit is placed above humanity, where corporations hold more power than governments, where decisions that affect the lives of millions are made in boardrooms by those whose only concern is the bottom line. They call it the free market, but what kind of freedom is this, where a handful of billionaires control more wealth than half the population combined, where workers are paid just enough to survive, but never enough to build real security, where small businesses are crushed under the weight of monopolies that dictate prices, wages, and even the laws themselves. This is not a system of opportunity. This is a system designed to keep power in the hands of the few while the majority fight over what little remains. They have perfected the art of deception. They tell the struggling worker that success is within reach if only they work harder, if only they make the right choices, if only they believe in the dream. But what they do not say is that the rules are written to keep the wealthy at the top and everyone else chasing an illusion. They do not say that wages have stagnated while the cost of living skyrockets, that millions of people in their so-called land of prosperity cannot afford healthcare, that their elderly, after a lifetime of labor, are left choosing between medicine and food. They do not say that their economic model thrives on keeping people in debt, on making education so expensive that students spend decades paying off loans, on ensuring that home ownership becomes a distant dream for entire generations. And when people demand better wages, when they protest against exploitation, when they challenge the corruption of the elite, they are met not with understanding but with hostility. They are told they are asking for too much. They are told that the market cannot afford to pay them fairly, while CEOs walk away with bonuses large enough to sustain entire cities. The same corporations that refuse to pay their workers a livable wage spend millions lobbying politicians to keep labor rights weak, to block healthcare reforms, to ensure that nothing changes. The system is not broken. It is working exactly as it was designed to. Beyond their borders, they preach economic freedom, yet they have turned entire nations into markets for their exploitation. They impose economic policies that strip countries of their resources, that force them into dependence, that make it impossible for them to rise as equals. They flood developing economies with their products, crushing local industries before they can grow. They create debt traps, lending money with conditions that force nations to surrender their sovereignty. And when those nations struggle under the weight of these policies, they are blamed for their own suffering, while the architects of this system continue to profit. Even their aid is not aid, it is control. They do not help without expecting something in return. Their so-called assistance comes with conditions that benefit their corporations, that open markets for their goods, that bind nations to agreements that keep them forever under their influence. And if a country dares to reject this economic servitude, if it dares to seek independence, it is punished through sanctions, through economic isolation, through destabilization. Their commitment is not to development, but to domination. They will never admit this. They will never say that their prosperity is built on the backs of the many, that their wealth depends on keeping others poor, that their economy is not a beacon of opportunity, but a machine of endless consumption, where human lives are just another resource to be used and discarded. But the world is beginning to see through the illusion. More and more people are questioning the fairness of a system that demands endless sacrifice from the many while delivering endless rewards to the few. More nations are choosing to build economies that serve their people rather than foreign interests. The era of unchecked exploitation is coming to an end. They told the world that their way was the only way, but now the world is proving them wrong. They present themselves as the standard bearers of justice, as the enforcers of law and order, as the ones who stand against oppression and wrongdoing. They tell the world that their system delivers fairness, that their courts are impartial, that their institutions uphold the highest principles of morality. But if justice is truly blind, why does it see so clearly when it serves their interests? Why does it punish the weak while protecting the powerful? Why does it silence those who speak against injustice while rewarding those who commit it? Their system is not built on justice, it is built on power. And power in their world is never held accountable. They tell us that no one is above the law, yet their elite commit crimes with impunity. Their financial institutions manipulate global markets. Their corporations exploit entire nations. Their leaders make decisions that lead to war, destruction, and death, and yet there are no consequences. They create laws not to uphold justice, but to maintain their dominance. The rich evade taxes, while the poor are crushed under the weight of legal penalties. Corrupt politicians caught in scandals return to power as if nothing happened. Those who expose the truth, who reveal the crimes of the powerful, are the ones who end up in prison, while those responsible for the crimes themselves continue to rule. They speak of human rights, yet their own prisons are filled with people whose only crime was to demand fairness, to question authority, to stand against the system. They claim to fight against oppression abroad, yet within their own borders, marginalized communities are denied justice, treated as criminals before they even have a chance to prove their innocence. They will invade other nations in the name of freedom while turning a blind eye to the suffering they cause, while refusing to acknowledge the injustices within their own society. They justify their wars, their interventions, their economic sanctions by claiming they are acting in the name of justice. But whose justice is this? Is it justice when they destroy a country, remove its leaders, and leave its people in chaos? Is it justice when they arm groups to destabilize governments they do not like, only to later call those same groups a threat when their control slips? Is it justice when they decide who has the right to govern, who deserves to lead, who must be removed, while ignoring the will of the people? Justice to them is nothing more than a tool, a word they use to mask their own pursuit of power. Their media plays its role well. It shapes narratives, decides who is guilty and who is innocent before any evidence is even presented. They will demonize their enemies, call them criminals, dictators, threats to global stability, while protecting those who serve their interests, no matter how many crimes they commit. The truth is irrelevant when they control the story. They rewrite history, erase their own wrongdoing, and present themselves as the eternal defenders of what is right. But the world is beginning to see through the illusion. Even the international institutions that were meant to uphold justice have been corrupted by their influence. They dictate who is investigation, who is sanctioned, who is labeled a violator of human rights. But when their own soldiers commit war crimes, when their own policies lead to mass suffering, there is silence. They demand accountability from others while refusing to answer for their own actions. They speak of international law, but they break it whenever it stands in the way of their goals. Their justice is not about fairness, it is about control. They will never admit this. They will continue to speak of democracy, of law, of human rights, all while ensuring that these principles serve them and them alone. They will continue to use justice as a weapon, punishing those who resist their domination while shielding those who enable it. But the world is no longer blind to their hypocrisy. People are waking up. Nations are refusing to accept this one-sided system. Justice cannot be dictated by those who believe themselves above it. Real justice is rising, not from their courts, not from their institutions, but from the people, from the nations that will no longer allow themselves to be judged by those who have no right to judge. Their time of using justice as a shield for their own power is ending. The world will no longer accept their rules. They claim to be the architects of peace, the defenders of stability, the ones who ensure that the world does not descend into chaos. They speak of security, of alliances, of strategies designed to protect not just their own people, but all of humanity. And yet, if we look at the world today, we see endless conflict, rising tensions, entire nations suffering from war, destruction and division. So we must ask, if they are the guardians of peace, why is the world in constant turmoil? If their system is meant to bring order, why does it leave behind nothing but instability? They justify their military presence across the world by claiming they are protecting democracy, but the reality is far different. They have stationed their forces in countries that never invited them, built bases on foreign soil, positioned themselves as the ultimate decision makers in the affairs of others. They say they are there to ensure stability, but what stability have they brought? Where they intervene, chaos follows. Where they offer protection, division takes root. Where they claim to fight terrorism, entire regions are plunged into endless cycles of violence. Their interest has never been peace. It has always been control. They fuel conflicts not because they seek resolution, but because conflict serves their agenda. They sell weapons to both sides, fund groups that serve their interess, destabilize governments that do not submit to their will. They claim to be fighting extremism, but they have nurtured it whenever it suited their goals. They wage wars under the pretense of eliminating threats, only to leave those nations broken, their people suffering, their futures uncertain. The devastation they leave behind is never their concern, because for them, instability is not a failure, it is a strategy. A world in conflict is a world where they remain in power, where they can continue to dictate terms, where they can continue to justify their presence and expand their influence. Their alliances are not built on mutual respect, but on submission. They do not seek partners, they seek followers. They impose conditions, demand loyalty, punish those who refuse to comply. They force nations into military pacts that serve only their interests, using them as tools to further their own dominance. Those who align with them are rewarded not because they stand for justice or peace, but because they serve a purpose. Those who refuse are isolated, sanctioned, threatened, and, if necessary, overthrown. This is not diplomacy, this is coercion. This is not global security, this is empire building under a different name. They use fear as their greatest weapon. They create enemies where none exist, spread paranoia about rising threats, manufacture crises to justify their actions. They tell their own people that without them, the world would collapse, that without their leadership, there would be anarchy. But what they do not say is that much of the instability in the world today is of their own making. They do not say that their wars have destroyed generations, that their interference has left nations in ruins, that their endless pursuit of power has brought misery to millions. They do not say that the very threats they claim to fight are often the result of their own policies, their own greed, their own arrogance. And while they preach peace, they remain the largest manufacturers and sellers of weapons in the world. They profit from destruction, from death, from the suffering of those caught in wars they helped ignite. They sign treaties with one hand while signing arms deals with the other. They speak of disarmament while stockpiling enough weapons to destroy the planet many times over. Their business is war, their currency is chaos, and their greatest fear is a world that no longer needs them. But that world is coming. Nations are beginning to reject their interference, to stand on their own, to refuse to be drawn into their conflicts. People are beginning to question the endless wars, the manufactured crises, the idea that security can only come through submission. The illusion they have maintained for so long is beginning to crumble. True peace is not built on domination, not enforced through threats, not maintained through military might. True peace comes when nations are free to determine their own destinies. when people are allowed to prosper without fear, when justice is not dictated by those who profit from injustice. They have ruled through fear, through force, through deception, but the world is awakening. Their power is no longer unquestioned. Their narrative is no longer unchallenged. The time of their unchecked control is ending. The future will not be written by those who thrive on war, but by those who choose freedom.